Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, Building Food, Programming Nature, and Food Within the Built Environment. My name is Ashley, and I am the Coordinator Development at the OAA. We will begin today's webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling in from today. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Before we start, I would like to share some important information to ensure an effective and professional webinar experience today. Please be informed that this session is being recorded for quality and educational purposes. In order to maintain a stable internet connection, we have muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. We highly encourage you to ask questions through our Q&A window. Feel free to submit any questions you have for our speakers. These will be addressed in the designated Q&A period at the end of the presentation. Kindly note that the chat function will be deactivated throughout this introduction. For those seeking continuing education learning hours, please note that attendance is crucial. A minimum of 80% attendance is required for those hours to be accredited for your OAA transcript. Please allow a few weeks for the processing and reporting of these hours on your transcript. And lastly, please note that the presenter does not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during this webinar. For accessibility, we have provided automated closed captioning service available in multiple languages to accommodate the needs of our diverse audience. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for today. Please welcome today's speakers, Laura Gamashtijan, Darius Gamashtijan, and Brett Fine.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. We're very, very excited to be able to present to you today. This is really the culmination of work for many, many years. You know, we're happy to be able to share it with our peers and other professionals who are joining us today. So let's maybe get started. So some context as it relates to the discussions, we really wanted to be able to focus in on what was our objective, what was the ultimate goal of this initiative as it relates to incorporating biophilic design and food production within buildings. That was really the crux of the objective. But how do we kind of get there? What was the sort of driving pieces or conditions that drove us to that sort of initiative? What was the process? What did we actually do to kind of build up the body of work, the research, the investigations, and some key terms that we wanted to be able to kind of define for the viewers here, so that you can understand the specificities of what each of these terms mean, what biophilic design is, what regenerative design is, what food production actually is, some of the systems involved in it as well, which is part of our investigations, really some critical pieces that we wanted to be able to outline and share with you all. And finally, we wanted to also kind of highlight the explorations. What were the kind of sort of concepts in a series of vignettes that we had developed over these past few years that really is kind of the sort of climax of incorporating all that research into a sort of a vignette, a sort of vision, a concept, if you will, and how we can actually implement it, some ideas, what those opportunities are, what those challenges are, and so forth. So some things to kind of expect for the day and for today's discussion. But maybe just before that, I do want to take a few moments of time to kind of talk a little bit about Kirkor Architects and Planners. As Ashley noted, I'm Laura Gamushtian. I'm the Director of Sustainability here at Kirkor Architects and Planners. My peers as well, Brett Fine and Darius Gamushtian, both associates and part of the sustainability department. We as a whole, our firm as a whole, really looks at and focuses in on high-rise, mixed-use residential buildings, but we also do a number of master planning. This is really kind of a critical piece to our work. We have our main headquarters in Toronto and a satellite office in Calgary. But for over the 40 plus years of our firm's existence, sustainability and resilient communities really is the forefront of the discussion, really is the key piece as it relates to the foundations and the partie of how we actually develop our work, how we actually plan out the buildings, the master planning, the urban planning of our projects. So really one of those key pieces is that sustainability and resilient communities. But how do you actually get to that? How do you actually meet those objectives? And really there were two main principal pieces that actually, I would say, inspired us personally to be able to kind of take it to the next level and really be able to kind of extrapolate it and kind of, I would actually say it would actually be diving into great detail on it. So really it was having to do with two components, the first being climate change and the second being food security. So on the first sort of left-hand side image that you'll see there, this is really kind of an extracted diagram from the United Nations IPCC climate change report. Really, this is kind of an important starting point for us, and I think for majority of our viewers, if not all, you might have heard this multiple times in other webinars, but it's still really important for us to be able to reiterate that the realities of climate change is true, and how our actions specifically, or even our inactions, would actually result in an increase in our global temperature. So this is really kind of an important piece. This diagram that I've noted here is, and I quote, kind of the important item that they've actually noted as rapidly narrowing window of opportunity to enable climate resilient development. So this is really kind of an important section. The areas in blue you'll see are really pertaining to the increase in temperature that's less than that 1.5 degrees Celsius that we hear about all the time. And then the areas in red is really where, say for example, if we didn't act and we sort of kept on in the trajectory of what we're doing, you'll see the increase in temperature greater than that 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this can be disastrous as it relates to the seasonalities, as it relates to the climate events that we're seeing even today. And I think the key understanding that we wanted to be able to sort of explore in greater detail is how that actually affects food production. And what we realize is that it's very much integrated. So as a result of the climate change and the increasing of temperatures, those atypical seasonal patterns, it has a huge impact on agriculture, from flooding to drought. Crop growth and harvesting is no longer reliable. It's no longer predictable. So food insecurity is a real issue, and it's a great indicator, pardon me. A great indicator of this is actually having to do with our food banks. So you'll see on the screen there, we actually highlighted a number of reports that we've been actually following for some years, which is the Daily Bread Food Bank Who's Hungry report. It's basically sort of like a state of affairs of what has been happening for that given year regarding poverty and food insecurity in the city of Toronto. We wanted to be able to highlight just one snippet. This is quite literally the tip of the iceberg as it relates to important data that we wanted to be able to communicate to our listeners today, which is really just having to do with the number of food bank visits in Toronto by year. So you can kind of see that graph on the side there. You can notice where COVID actually hit in the year 2020, but you can see that with every subsequent year, the number of food visits that have been happening in just the city of Toronto, this is not even looking at the Greater Toronto Area, the Ontario as a province, and the country as a whole. But you can see with every subsequent year, it's been increasing dramatically. So some quick and very important statistics that we also wanted to highlight is, for example, one really crazy stat is that after utilities and rent, individuals have about $7.78 left in the bank per day to be able to address things for food. It's mind-boggling. It's really, really scary. It's concerning. In 2023, it used to be $6.67. In 2024, last year, it's $7.78. So it has gotten better, but I think it's important to note another sort of pairing of information with that is just the number of visits have increased from 2023 to 2024. So there has been about a 960,000 number of visit increase from 2023 to 2024. So we've been following these reports from 2022. And honestly, the increase in need is very, very relevant and very clear. And I think it's also important to note that these aren't necessarily numbers. Like I'm throwing out a lot of numbers here, but these are real people. These are real families that are being affected. So if there's anything that we can do as potentially as architects to kind of address both the climate mitigation actions, but also ways in which we can address food security, I think that's something that we should explore. And that's certainly one of the things that was kind of the critical piece to the objective of this initiative, really looking at climate mitigation, as I mentioned, through those sustainable and resilient communities, which we've been looking at for some time, but how do we actually implement it through regenerative design? How do we actually restore those environments? How do we actually ensure that the systems that are used to support them are being buttressed? And certainly as it relates to food production, what are those opportunities that we can actually implement and in a way, ideally, potentially work through the food insecurity issue that we've been seeing? So that was the sort of the idea, the notion of the objective. How did we kind of see ourselves and participating in that? It was really implementing our architectural expertise in creating those regenerative spaces and creating those communities through biophilic design and food production. I'm going to be covering those definitions in a few slides, but as it relates to our responses, to be able to actually implement those expertise in achieving those objectives, it was really important for us to not only utilize our own understanding as it relates through to the actual profession of architecture, but really be able to do the work, be able to actually investigate, do that research and development, do those investigations, understand what those tools are that are available. How do those systems actually work, whether it's an actual aquaponics system or whether it's an actual operational model? So these are the kind of levels of analyses that we kind of looked into. And also, we have to have the vision at the end of the day. We wanted to be able to kind of translate what was in our minds as it relates to the concept into reality. So how do you actually kind of do something like that? And in the next slide, I'll show you, this was one of our very, very first vignettes that we had drawn up some time ago as it relates to what was the ideal kind of exploratory vision or vignette that we wanted to be able to kind of see. And you can kind of notice from the image there that it's not just sort of urban agriculture, but it's really kind of as it relates to the biophilic design. You got actual access to natural light. You have elements of water, you have plants and vegetation, but from a food production perspective, you are literally harvesting a bushel of wheat. So, you know, this was the ideal, this was the kind of goal that we set out to be able to achieve. And actually later on in the presentation, we'll kind of dive into that in more detail. I think Darius is going to be covering that, and Brett's going to be looking at explaining what those possible systems are. But this was kind of like the original thought process and the original vision for it. So before I kind of dive into, the team sort of dives into what those details are, I think it's really important to be able to highlight some of the processes and really some of the important definitions and terms that we've actually looked into to be able to define and understand what it is that we're actually setting out to achieve. Sort of how do we articulate what it is that we've been sort of seeing and what we have in the back of our minds that Brett, Darius, and I have been sort of aligned on for some time. And the only way that we can kind of outline this was really in a series of scales. So there's kind of 3 levels of implementation. There's one where, as we know, there's just no change. We keep on going with what we do. There's the sustainable implementations, as you can see. And then there's also the regenerative methods and methodologies or strategies that you can kind of utilize. So really, as it relates to no change, it's pretty self-explanatory. We're just kind of continuing on our trajectory. We're increasing use of materials and resources and energy as well. We're basically using more than what's actually been provided and or what is actually even there. So we're kind of taking out more than what is actually existing. So in a really kind of great example that might be able to kind of contextualize this a little bit more is if you think about deforestation, where we're just sort of chopping down as many trees as possible. We're letting the land kind of sit there and degrade. And that's kind of why I've noted in there it could lead to degeneration and even devolution. So it's really, there's kind of like nothing left. Sustainable design, on the other hand, sustainability as a whole, it's kind of sort of see it as a scale of equal weights, where you're basically breaking even. The resources that you use don't necessarily overwhelm or outweigh the resources that are available to you. So we're not necessarily taking out more than what we need. Although it's actually important, and I would say good practice to be able to think about and actually implement, there is still things that we should be able to kind of think about as it relates to contributing more, giving back more than what is actually being taken out from the environment and nature. So there's kind of an equilibrium, as I've noted there, or a balance between humans and nature, but you're neither doing good nor are you doing bad. So kind of keeping in the theme of forestation, we can kind of see this particular example of taking out a tree, you plant a tree. As it relates to regenerative practices and design in general, this is really where you're contributing back more to the environment than what you're actually taking. So you're offsetting whatever you have taken from nature and the environment as a whole, and you're giving it back. But I think there's a really important key piece here, and it's having to do with the integrated systems, as I've noted on the slide deck, as it relates to the humans and nature. This is really kind of a coexistence, and that relationship between the two is very, very important. I'm going to be highlighting that in a couple of slides as well, just how it kind of ties in with everything. But again, just sort of going back to kind of what some of the examples that we talked about as it relates to the forestation. This would be one of those examples where you're not only planting more trees than what you've actually taken out, but you're actually going back to those deforested sections of the land, and you're actually restoring those damaged environments. So, and you're not just planting trees, but you're restoring what's actually been damaged. So that's a little bit about regenerative design. I did want to touch on biophilic design because it's really important that we kind of understand what biophilic design is, what it's comprised of. I know there was a number of webinars in the past just this year talking about biophilic design, so it's really exciting to see. Basically, it's having to do with establishing, again, that nature and human relationship, building that together through design and through buildings. So there's a lot of different qualities. The main features, as I've highlighted in there, having to do with presence of water, having to do with material connections, having to do with integration of natural light and plants and vegetation. These were kind of the key pieces that we actually focused on, although biophilic design as a whole has a number of other principles and qualities to be able to look at. And those were actually noted in the secondary column there as it relates to those additional qualities of prospect, of airflow, of sensory stimuli, and making sure that there's not just visual connection, which we've touched on in the main features, but also non-visual connections with nature as well. So there's quite a number of elements that comprise of biophilic design, but our sort of explorations really focused on the main features. The other piece to this is really having to do with food production as well. So, and I want to be clear that, food production that we've interpreted is not necessarily following the traditional definition of what food production is, where it's kind of taking the processing of transforming those raw ingredients to an actual food product, like a chips or something like that. That's not how we kind of interpreted food production to be. In our minds and as part of our objective, we really wanted to be able to focus in food production as it relates to the process of planting and growing and harvesting the food that would then be able to service the local community. So this was a key sort of differentiation that I wanted to be able to highlight here. Peoples and places, this is really quite important. We wanted to be able to understand beyond our own expertise, beyond the architectural profession, who do we need to talk to? Where do we need to go to be able to kind of understand the logistics of food distribution? So you can kind of see, for example, up at the top there, those key points of design, build, approve, people, technologies, growing, distribution. We spoke to a number of professionals, from our consultants to vertical green garden specialists to levels of government, sustainability experts, farmers, biologists. We went to a number of different locations like food banks, like food hubs, food sheds. We spoke with food charities. We spoke with food banks. So I think it's really important to understand that, you know, it's great that we as architects can think about these things critically, but it's really important to be able to cast a wide net and work with other industry professionals to be able to get a better understanding of what it is that you're trying to set out to achieve. That goes with everything, but I mean, especially as it relates to food production. But you can kind of see how this all sort of fits together. You can see that regenerative design and regenerative principles are really the kind of glue that fits everything together. So just as it relates to the initial sort of point of giving back more than what we've actually taken out from environment and nature, that directly ties back in our minds with regards to food production, how we're producing that food, we're growing it, we're harvesting it, we're serving the community so that they don't necessarily need to go to the Loblaws or they need to go to the Metro. They can actually have it within their actual building. In addition to this, the key piece here is that there is a humans and nature integrated system that's as an integrated system that directly ties back in with biophilic design, because biophilic design is looking at the connection between humans and nature through design and building. So that's kind of really the process of it. I hope that kind of painted a clear picture for everybody and really does set up a great foundation for the investigations, which I'll pass on to my coworker, Brett, to sort of explore and analyze.
Great, thanks, Laura. So as we further went along with our investigation, it was important for us to determine and research what programs and or documentation existed out there to help kind of justify our initiative of combining food design, biophilic design and food production within the built environment. And we found quite a bit. Most notably, we found the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. This was developed by the United Nations members in an effort to provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. That was a quote. So they devised 17 targets. So I'm sure many of you have seen them before. These standards kind of allow for everyone in the global community to address the critical goals for a better world. Please note that the SDG number 2 there on your screen, the top left, kind of denotes zero hunger. And its mission, and I quote, is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture, end quote. We believe that combining both biophilic design and food production can help to address many of these goals. This slide kind of emphasizes the SDGs that we feel our initiative touches upon, beyond just the zero hunger. So we felt that number 3, good health and well-being, number 4, quality education, number 6, clean water and sanitation, number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, number 11, sustainable cities, number 12, responsible consumption and production, number 14, life below water, and number 15, life on land, were all SDGs that were great targets, that this just one initiative kind of touches upon on a global scale. So SDGs were, our top priority for the UN, and so we knew we were on the right path. Next slide, please. So continuing our investigation, we decided to look kind of closer to home, of course, going from the macro global scale to the micro local scale. Since most of our work is kind of focused in and around the Greater Toronto Area and into Alberta, we looked at a variety of municipalities and their own green development standards and if they have them. Like it's important to highlight that some municipalities are focusing in on urban agriculture in greater detail across the country. Some municipalities currently even have urban agricultural targets as part of their own green development standards, but while others have them more in the form of kind of separate documentation, kind of only outlining maybe action plans or analyses or concepts. There's always room to grow, of course, sorry the pun, as many municipalities do not yet, which of course is the key word there, do not yet have urban agricultural targets in their green development standards. Like if this were an interactive presentation, I'd probably take a poll now and to find out which municipalities you think should show on screen actually have urban agricultural targets, like from Calgary to Mississauga, Caledon, Toronto, Brampton, Markham, Richmond Hill, Vaughan. 3, 2, 1. Well, it's actually Toronto and Calgary. They're the two big cities up here, and they don't even have targets to meet urban agriculture. So we highly recommend that you research your local municipal standards for food production initiatives, based on where your projects are located, to ensure they align with that municipality. Next slide. So as we start thinking about now kind of the implementation of biophilic designs and food production systems, we felt the need internally to find a way of describing these different design approaches more to a broader audience. So we developed a categorization method, like including these 3 tiers, tiers 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 kind of represents only biophilic design strategies. So if you're looking to design a project, tier 1 would be only implementing biophilic strategy that Laura talked about earlier. Tier 2 would include both biophilic designs together with some food production systems. So now we're kind of slowly integrating the best of both worlds here, of biophilic design and food production for our maximum input. And tier 3, implements really only food production systems. So these are just kind of categorization systems. Each tier, has the ability to be scaled, like up or down, depending on the size and scope of each project. Within each tier, there's also the flexibility to be paired with a variety of programming. On the left, on the right of your screen, you see programs like restaurants, landscaping features, residential dwellings, seniors care, daycare, childcare, urban farm and food production. So we would take all these tiers and we would, program in what we needed based on our projects. The next slide, please. So just kind of, again, focusing more on tier 1, which, as mentioned, it kind of represents only biophilic strategies. This design approach can, we think, honestly be paired with any programming and at any scale, and of course, the more it gets implemented, the better the positive impact to the end users. From our point of view, the image on the top, is a restaurant. So here it's just implementing, plants and trees, with coupled with natural light and soft edges and natural materials, as a way to enhance that space. But this could be applied, across the board, as I said, into residential buildings, amenity spaces, lobbies, into seniors cares again, senior care buildings, their common spaces, and even daycare and beyond. Next slide, please. So tier 2 again is kind of biophilic designs together with food production. So we got the little tree and the apple and the carrot; those are our kind of icons. And this allows for kind of more flexibility and kind of maximum benefits to the end users or operators. Right? You're coupling pure biophilic design with some food production. You're getting a lot of added benefit, both from health and well-being point of view, and kind of a food security standpoint. This design approach, I guess, lends itself both to public and private spaces, and many different kind of occupancy types, excuse me. Again, we're showing kind of simple graphics on the right, but you can include landscape features, residential buildings, seniors, daycare, childcare, restaurants. And then lastly, next slide, is tier 3, the implementation of food producing systems. So we felt that for our companies that we want to pair this most with multi-dwelling residential and commercial retail applications. The image at the bottom is an aquaculture system where the fish and the plants are together, and we'll get into that a little bit later, what that means. But there are lots of different models for growing food, and having access to that food right to the end users from more of a farm to table concept, it really yields maximum benefit to the end user. Next slides. So just a quick step back about what's out there. How do we grow food? What are the different models to kind of continue our investigation? There are soil-based models, which is the traditional method of agriculture, obviously using soil. It's good, obviously, because it's the most common that people know about. It produces high quality food. The nutrients are captured in the soil, get together with the water and the roots of the plant. Use that to create hardy plants. Obviously, there's some disadvantages to using soil indoors. There's some spatial requirements, the depth, there's the weight. Obviously, there's the health and maintenance of the soil. That needs to be monitored quite closely. And soil-based methods are a little bit more prone to pests and pest control. There is a hydroponics method of growing, which utilizes water, pure water enhanced with nutrients to grow plants. The plants can grow both in a vertically or horizontal system. This helps to kind of space plan. You can use less space if you grow vertically. This is very kind of water efficient, and pest control is kind of down to a minimum in this one. Some of the disadvantages are with hydroponics is that, again, there's maintenance and monitoring of the nutrient levels. It definitely is required, as well as kind of the properties of that water, like it's the pH balance of the water needs to be monitored carefully. The nutrients have to be added, to the water for the plants to grow. So you need to kind of cater the nutrients that you have in your water to your specific plant that you're growing. Next is a hydroponic method. Hydroponic method is really kind of like a closed loop system.
Aquaponic.
Sorry, aquaponics. Thank you. Aquaponics is like a closed loop system, utilizing water and fish together to grow plants. So the fish are in a tank, and their excrement is captured and filtered, and the remaining nutrients are used to feed the plant in that water system, that kind of hydroponic system together with the aquaponics. Obviously, there's some advantages with this, as you can utilize both the plants and you can actually harvest the fish. So there's two avenues for collecting food. Some disadvantages to this is that there's really a sensitive balance between the fish and the plant and the harvesting. And so you need to closely manage these systems. And obviously the fish need to be managed and taken care of appropriately. And so lastly is the aeroponic system. Aeroponics is really like a fine kind of mist that gets sprayed over the plant roots. That mist is filled with nutrients similar to hydroponics. And that just helps, the mist gets absorbed into the root system and then it grows kind of naturally. This is beneficial because it uses less water. But there are some disadvantages, as it does require some high maintenance, and mechanically, we've heard that the equipment used to mist, the water over the roots often gets clogged, and so there's definitely some close maintenance issues to be considered. Next slide. So now you have an idea of the systems that are out there. And if we again just kind of focus in on more kind of tier 3 kind of food production systems, it's important to consider like how to design and how the end users will interact with the different growing systems. Like a lot of this, so this kind of will allow for a wide range of abilities and mobilities and age groups to access and enjoy these systems. There's vertical systems versus horizontal systems. There's kind of on the floor, to consider versus like elevated off the floor. I mean, the top image is purely about hydroponics and soil-based systems kind of coupled together. Number 1 on the left, top left, is a vertical garden. It can be wall mounted with space saving. Number 2, is a soil-based system. It's down on the floor level, and as I mentioned earlier, it definitely requires some depth. Number 3 is kind of an integration where you start adding racks of vertical gardens, to maximize the amount of space and maximize the amount of food that gets grown. And number 4 could be both hydroponic and soil-based here, but so that it's elevated off the ground to allow for all mobilities and demographics to access the space. The bottom row graphic is really more about a hydroponic interaction. As I said, like there's lots of opportunities to have some fun and have fish going around in an aquarium in your public spaces, and really kind of make this as like a feature you can interact in and around and above. And even you can have some fun harvesting the fish while others are harvesting the vegetation and the food production. And then kind of on the number 4 there on the bottom right is really an interaction of both. You can, like I said, walk above the fish, while you're harvesting the food in kind of vertical growing towers. And so, like if we consider combining these, like all these different applications together, like you'll get some really interesting results in some unique spaces. And some items to consider, obviously can include like the aisle widths, the accessibility, the platform and stacking. You can turn these modality or methods into kind of nice gateways and feature landmarks. So like, why not have some fun with it? Next slide. And then, once we've talked about the different types of systems, now it's implemented into your building. How do we manage it? How do we operate it? So we're going to briefly just chat about different avenues kind of for the long-term operation and management of the food. There's a few different models that are out there. I don't think this is an exhaustive list. This is just some of the ones that we've come across. There is obviously a for-profit model. The for-profit model is really kind of owner, developers manage the farm for profits, right? They harvest the food, and that food gets sold to residents or markets for obviously for a profit, and possibly if there's surplus cash, that cash can then get reinvested maybe into something like fees for the building or others or services that they need. Obviously pay their employees. So there's also on the right there is food hubs and community co-ops. This is another system where it's a kind of a community-run co-op where everyone has ownership, a stake in it, some ownership, and they manage the food hubs for the residents. This can include options like time banking. Let's say where people kind of pay for the food by donating their time. It's a kind of a transactional. Like, I'll spend my time harvesting and growing the food, and I'll actually get some food back in payment. You can have very kind of culturally relevant foods grown kind of to suit the demographics in this model. Moving on, there's farm leasing, which is kind of like a landlord-tenant relationship. Here owners lease the space or farm to work or to farm. The individuals work the farm, harvest, produce, and then sell to the locals or other markets. There's farm residence model. The residents are kind of given access to pieces of plots of land or beds to grow their own produce. Here they grow what they want, but it often it takes time to review and manage to ensure that the site is generally cared for. So it's overseen by a greater body, not just the individuals that are planting. There's a partnership model. Here, a developer and not-for-profits like food banks or charities, they kind of get together, which generates work and jobs and food, and then the food is sold kind of at a lower cost. And then lastly, there's the condo fee kind of funded model. We hear operating costs are built into the condo fee, allowing for residents to pick up their produce for free, since it's baked into the cost of their condo model. So this is more like a donation, but you can grow your own food, but it's to no cost to you. And of course, there's maintenance involved in that and looking after the beds, and that's all kind of wrapped up into the condo's fees. So from there, I'm going to pass it off to Darius, and he's going to talk a little bit more about our initiative and the exploration that we did.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Laura, and welcome those who've joined us. As Laura mentioned earlier, we are in the, as we showed that initial vignette of taking the idea and putting it on paper. It's sort of a natural process of an architect, I guess, is to sort of translate that idea and, and talk about it and discuss it. Then this section of the slideshow is called Explorations. And we're going to be going through a series of vignettes that tackle the different tiers that Kirkor established, starting with tier 1, of course. As you know, again, the architects need to sort of delineate those ideas, to jot down those ideas into a series of shreds or vignettes on paper. But that for us, in terms of this stage of the research, needs to go to the next level. We need to think of these, these pretty pictures. We can paint pretty pictures, but we're also going to have to be critical about those pictures. How can we realize these ideas on paper? How can we realize them in the built form? This goal, as you've seen, it's quite serious. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about UN-led initiatives being looked at. And most of all, not just on a global scale, but even on a local scale, as Laura mentioned earlier, food insecurity in our own backyard. So we're sort of not necessarily up against the clock, but yes, we do have ideas, but how do we make these things feasible and real and think critically about them and sort of have them come to fruition, pardon the pun there too. So the analysis is what we want to sort of achieve and implement and what those challenges would be. First is that we're starting with tier 1. We've seen plants in lobbies, in offices, big commercial spaces, institutionally as well. But we haven't really seen sort of more intensive biophilic interventions in, let's say, residential areas as well. So this is a tier 1 example. It's all seasonal. We have trees in a lobby during a snowstorm. Hopefully everyone got to work okay today. And this can combine with other biophilic features or other systems that we're approaching. Obviously, we're using our primary approach to having actual plants inside, as well as biophilic finishes such as the use of wood, and together kind of create an interesting space, mainly in the common elements of the multi-residential buildings. So again, biomorphic forms rather, plant interaction, natural lighting materials. This could be calming and mental health benefits, and residential office lobby, common areas. Those are the kind of elements we're looking at. But again, having these sort of this tier being implemented in actual built space into an actual planned space is actually quite challenging. We have to think about mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, where do these sort of the soil bases for these plants sort of go into the plumbing of it, the maintenance of it, even structural considerations. You know, all these trees in a lobby and having a forest like atrium is great, let's say in a condominium, but what kind of loading is that when you're actually trying to plan the actual building out? What does your P1 look like? What do your slabs look like? What do your cranks look like? So, and again, we're also even looking at, you know, floor to floor heights and allocating those atriums. And as you know, atriums are double height spaces. How does that affect your second floor efficiency in terms of your layout of other programs? So these are all kind of things that kind of have to, as a holistic approach, I know we like to use that word, as a holistic approach, think about how the building needs to sort of consider the implementation of these tiers. And again, there's a human factor, as Brett mentioned a last slide about the maintenance of this flora. You know, the watering, the pruning, the cleanup, just the general upkeep of these things. But again, walking into sort of a quasi forest-like space in a residential lobby, doubling in as even a lounge space or an amenity space, that's a benefit to users and even to the clientele to some extent. Next slide, please. This is a great vignette. This is basically, we're kind of showing you the last, but at least in the second slide, this is sort of the dream, and I'll explain that to you. This vignette is showing how all the food produced in the building would come to a certain space or a hub or a center, and then be distributed to the immediate community or locally more in the neighborhood. Now, this is a tier 1 to tier 2 biophilic intervention, and we're sort of suggesting that there can be, and if you look at the background, there's a lot of mid-mod towers around there, as you know. There's about 1,000 to 2,000 mid-mod towers in Toronto, and you know, whether they're kind of geared to more tower in the park kind of layout, we're suggesting that the distribution or the final distribution can be a form of infill, and that infill can be considered a food hub, which is sort of the ultimate goal. You know, that food hub being the opportunity to distribute locally grown food. Again, so the factors being, you know, we're looking at a market area. It promotes multi-general interaction. It's an accessible pavilion, multifunctional spaces, and even to an extent, mass timber use. As we know, mass timber constructions a lot less carbon intensive than concrete structures. Using these kinds of structures to sort of house the program of the final stage of that food growth, and then distributing that to the community. Now, whether these pavilions are more permanent or temporary, they also add the additional use of other kind of programmatic uses, such as even cultural and sort of cultural programs as well, or activities. So this is all great. This is sort of an idealistic, you know, infill in a tower community. What kind of challenges do we face? Well, you know, local municipal bylaws, you know, program types, infill construction, and relevant setbacks. I mean, what kind of zoning do we have to go into sort of consider infill? Is there still these existing setbacks? How can we provide, you know, even an all seasonal sort of pavilion to distribute that food? That's kind of interesting. Do we design these pavilions to be temporary or permanent? Are they even actually sort of centrally located with all the amongst all the towers? Maybe they're integrated into each building. Maybe these pavilions can be at Tower A and other types of pavilions in Tower B. This is the kind of things. These are the kind of things to consider. And also, like as Brett mentioned in a previous slide, what kind of food distribution is this? Is this food for free? We've grown this food in Tower A. Is it free for Tower A residents, Tower B residents? Maybe it is. Is it food here becoming a farmer's market for people outside of the site? Let's say in Tower C and D on another site, or another Tower A and B. What kind of financial models are those? We would like to see, at least to tackle food security even more effectively, is, you know, it would be for free, and maybe even selling to potentially local markets, as we're going to get on to the next slide. But before we do, we're going to have to go back into our building and explore this tier 1 and 2 biophilic design intervention. We're sort of looking this as common spaces. Like we did in the lobby, what can maybe amenities or other common spaces be elevated to? What can they look like when considering biophilic programs? In this case, yes, this is an amenity area, but again, promoting multi-generational interaction, even the opportunity for a learning center, multifunctional spaces, even the opportunity for a greenhouse. So here we see, we're amplifying typical amenity programs, and perhaps maybe even a library or even more of a lounge spaces, and we're adding that biophilic element in there for people to kind of gather towards, kind of enjoy, and also adding maybe newer features of allowing natural light to come into the spaces as well. And again, this is a space where old generations can enjoy. But as you can see, sort of in the lower right-hand corner, we even have a new program like a seed bank or even a greenhouse. And this is a very unique program. You wouldn't really see a seed bank as part of an amenity for a building, but not only does that sort of encourage, planting and the notion and the concept of biophilia or biophilic design and food production in these buildings, but also there's a potential of there's an educational potential here, a nature-based pedagogy, if I may, where kids can come in, see the plants, see the nature, learning about planting, learn about upkeep and maintenance, and also learning about different kinds of seeds here. So again, that's an interesting idea, but it could also be a challenge where, programmatic feasibility, expected common use versus, new biophilic programming. And again, is the space, the desired outcome? Are we, is the demand for gyms more than these sort of lounges and educational areas and harvesting zones? So, and again, architecturally speaking, can we have these kinds of skylights and stuff like this? This is stuff that we can suggest now and then work backwards with either clientele and consultants to realize these dreams. Yes, next slide. So here's an interesting one. This is a tier 1 and tier 2 intervention, but it's suggesting that there's a restaurant type program inside the building that we're proposing, that the interventions of and the methodologies rather of hydroponics, let's say, and even aquaponics, can be used to produce food and sustain a program type, in this case commercial or the restaurant, and that food then supports the restaurant and is being used as a sort of restaurant opportunity, as a financial model to sort of upkeep the growth in the building, but also give back to the building in terms of financial considerations, helping management of the building, et cetera. So we're looking at vertical gardens, hydroponics and aquaponics. Obviously, it's restaurant grown, operated to produce. Also, even employment opportunities, leasable spaces, and can be in parallel with communal kitchens. So again, there's a lot of challenges here, particularly the authenticity and logistics of commercial spaces. Can food production in the building sustain it? Can a restaurant fully rely on building produce types and the yield expected of these kind of growing methods? This is something interesting. So I think it's a unique opportunity to implement in a building. I think the distribution has to be considered. Can residents eat here for free? Are residents paying? Are people from the outside coming in and enjoying this restaurant at a reasonable price? And any profits and proceeds go back into the building, like we said. And of course, again, the financial models and the commercial revenue, again, as we mentioned. But again, we're combining, tier 1 and tier 2. I think that this is sort of the pinnacle of tier 1 and tier 2 combining. We've got the food growing opportunities, and of course, a very nice biophilic considered space here as well. The next slide. And we're actually now looking at in-suite scalability. What happens if we take all the food production and the biophilic elements and we shrink that down into a suite for a family to live in? We're looking at vertical gardens inside a residential dwelling unit. This obviously can also be scaled down to amenity use, as we said, which include communal kitchens and which will be harvested. And then obviously, as you can see, as per this vignette, there is a multi-generational access and participation. Would take so like if the central solarium, for instance, in this suite, that'd be the tier 1 portion, whereas the grow wall here would be sort of leading into the tier 3. So cohesively, they created like a tier 2 example. So this is sort of another more idealistic method of direct food access to residents, not even going down to the common spaces, but even being accessed within their suites as well. So this can result in some challenges. I mean, can residents be trained to maintain and pick from their growing wall or from their whatever other methodology, let's say hydroponics, they'd have in their suite? Would they have to be trained? How and would they have to upkeep these systems, or would the building maintenance come in and upkeep them for them? Again, there's systems to think about on how this would work, and also, again, there's a level of marketability to this. We have to also consider the clientele and the developer or other clients on how they would see this as feasible, and if they do see it as feasible, what is the most effective method of applying these initiatives? Again, food waste and crop maintenance would also be a factor as well. Next slide, please. So, Kirk Architects has experience in senior care developments, and we thought it'd be important to include that in today's presentation. We're looking here at vertical gardens, soil-based growing, hydroponics, intensive food protection to a certain degree, and even employment opportunities. Now, we're not experts in gerontology, looking after seniors, but we know that obviously there's consultants for that, and we do know that to a certain degree that there is something called therapeutic horticulture. And like we mentioned earlier in the amenity vignette, having that nature-based pedagogy, we're kind of going to the end of the spectrum here with the therapeutic horticulture and how seniors and people with different abilities react to biophilic spaces, and how accessing and interacting with these sort of growing techniques can help people to sort of benefit from that, to keep active, to keep busy, and to even enjoy the activities they once did enjoy in the comfort of their own home, should they be receiving care here, of course. So we can see that yes, it is a tier 2 and tier 3 biophilic intervention, but tier 1 interventions are actually easily integrated here, as in just having plants and growing walls here to sort of spruce up the spaces, or at least the common spaces of these care places. So as you know, that there are challenges with that. Different abilities of those that need care must be considered. Mobility, dexterity, as Brett mentioned earlier in sort of our charrette with soil-based and hydroponics. People with the mobility access, people with mobility issues do have access on let's say elevated planters, for example. There does have to be additional supervision, when using tools or interacting with this equipment as well. That's something to consider, and as well as spatial considerations for these types of programs. We know that through our experience, we know that there needs to be a substantial amount of suites to care for the seniors, but also other programs have to still have their space. Now, for example, memory care. Can memory care benefit from biophilic interventions? These are the conversations to have with the clientele and to continue these initiatives forward, if appropriate. Yes, next slide. And finally, we're back. We're back to the initial dream, really. And this is kind of pretty intense, actually. This is a full-on tier 3 biophilic design intervention. Some of you may say, this is a little intense. What's Kirkwood thinking? So we're thinking ahead, to be honest with you. And if this looks like, if we're aiming to get 100, this vignette's kind of 200, really. And from there, when we propose 200 and think about 200, when life sort of kicks in and the available resources that we have sort of become apparent, we might end up at 110, maybe 125. We're still at a surplus of what we're aiming for. So here we're seeing, soil-based growing, if I may say, high-intensity farming, if you can call it that. Aquaponics or aquaponics and hydroponics are possible, but we are exploring the intensive food production, and yes, for profit, for residential and commercial use. We see food supplier opportunities, employment opportunities, as well as potential leasing space opportunities here. So there's a plethora of potential, but there's also a lot of challenges to think about that. For example, crop type feasibility. We know that growing wheat in certain medium, let's say in soil or other medium, may not be as efficient as growing other types of crops, such as lettuce and peppers, for example, for instance. Again, light requirements and irrigation, there's got to be a lot of maintenance. The MEP systems really have to be considered here to sort of achieve this dream of a high density farming, whether it's 5 years from now, whether it's 50 years from now. Let's all start now thinking about the systems needed to create a vignette like this for the benefit of not only regenerative design, but of course, food security. We're thinking about equipment storage and use, growing medium integration, and of course, even pest control. We understand we're only architects. We understand that the architectural scope is quite large inherently, but also that, as Laura mentioned in the previous slides, going to different parties, different people with different expertise, such as vertical growing vendors and even biologists, even farmers, and even building maintenance and developers having their input and say, this is a good start to sort of achieve and realize this dream of nature, full nature integration into our living spaces, our buildable environment, our built environment. Next slide. And we'd like to thank you very much for joining us, and we also we're grateful for the OAA for giving us time to share our current research and methodologies, and we hope to see this initiative take off, not just with us, but moving forward with everyone to address those concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our speakers. That was an amazing presentation. I learned a lot. I'm sure so did our members who are in the room as well. Now is the time for Q&A. So I do see a question in the Q&A box, which is fantastic. Thank you. For those who want to ask questions to Laura, Darius, and Brett, please go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A. But if you guys want to start with the first question, by all means, go ahead.
Thanks, Ashley. Yes, we do have one. It says, where in the world can we find real-world precedents for resilient design? In my past research, I discovered that China achieved its UN Sustainable Development Goals 10 years ahead of schedule, with the primary goal being no poverty. For instance, Turnscape design has many examples of ecological civilization, often in collaboration with their efficient centralized government. So in short, the question was, well, are there other real-world precedents that we can look for as it relates to resilient design? Darius, Brett, did you want to maybe chime in first?
So, thank you, Talat. Great question. It's interesting. The no poverty is sort of, yes, it is the primary goal. I guess in terms of this scope, no poverty is sort of an external factor through whatever the economy and the systems and that then there may be. But we feel that looking at number 2, at least in this sense, alleviates that, let's say people are in poverty or people are in need, but at least that there is no hunger in that poverty. So once sort of hunger is sort of taken care of, as well as other goals, that can help alleviate a portion of no poverty. Now, in terms of the ecological civilization, collaborating, with the government, that's a great point. Now, if we looked earlier in the slides, we saw a portion of approval, and they also mentioned that certain municipalities or regions have food growing in their plans. So again, where the research might be taking us is to get out to that governmental level, and whether advocate for it or create, eventually create policies. That's sort of that route that hopefully us and others can take. So we do believe that integrating it into a government, or at least an authority having jurisdiction, considering these models, we think it's the way to go. In terms of precedents, I mean, we've looked at precedents, yes, mainly in Asia. That's correct. We agree, but also we've looked at European precedents as well. And these precedents are actually very small scale, including restaurants being integrated with the food that they're growing. Hopefully that answered most of your question, Tyler. It's a good one.
Brett, did you want to add anything before I do?
No, go on.
Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we did look at a number of projects in Asia, actually a lot of, I mean, Asia's been really quite ahead, to your point. The fact that they've achieved SDGs 10 years ahead of schedule, I'm actually not surprised whatsoever. There's a lot of precedents out there, and specifically in Asia. We also looked at, in addition to European models, we have found a couple of American models as well. We have heard of particular projects in Atlanta, Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, as it relates to food hub and food distribution centers. They're actually really looking into that quite in depth. Which is very, very exciting. So there are a lot of projects out there. I think maybe it's just a refinement in the search, but they do exist for sure. I think oh, sorry.
Yes, this is, yes, a systemic collaboration with the governments and people in line to sort of allow this to happen. I mean, there's that famous, well, it's not a famous story among us, I guess, but not to everyone else, but just to keep you in the loop, that there's other architects we've spoken to from, let's say, Europe, for example, and we were like we weren't gushing, but we were saying, Europe's so ahead, Europe's this, Europe's that, and they kind of they didn't smirk, but they kind of laughed, they kind of chuckled and said, "You think that the Europeans did all this out of the goodness of their heart?" He said, "No," he said, "they did this because this was sort of integrated into policy, into government or authorities having jurisdiction mandating these things. That's why Europe's so ahead." So we actually, and that may be a funny story, but we actually kind of took something from that and said, "Hey, listen, if we want to make these vignettes a dream come true, if we want to help people wake up, and yes, they may be undergoing poverty or difficulty, but at least that food portion is taken care of. Let's start kicking it up a notch and seeing who we can speak to."
Great, thanks, guys. There's a couple more questions here that I'd like to be able to get to. One of them was, has Kirkor had opportunity to construct any of these tier systems for food production? So we've actually done a number of projects and working with our client groups, a number of proposals with regards to outlining these tiers, outlining this initiative as a whole. One of which is actually in a schematic design concept right now. We just sort of submitted the proposal for that earlier this week. Not in construction, but definitely in schematic design for sure, which is very, very exciting. So stay tuned for that. There is another question that just came in right now. Currently, our farmers across Canada are dealing with new generations not wanting to farm. Very good point. That's true. Our youth not wanting to work as pickers, our food industry not paying our farmers the value of their productions, our grocery store prices, our food beyond the means of many families, etc. Correct. These models appear to turn their backs on our farmers. Okay. Do we really need to grow food in our urban infrastructure, or do we need to stand more for our farmers and have our government support our farmers and their lands? That's a really, really great question, James, and one in which we've been actually asking ourselves. And this is one of the key reasons why we wanted to speak with farmers to be able to understand their perspective. And really, it was actually a very interesting conversation. And I think the key piece that was really kind of a takeaway was really collaboration. That was one of the fundamental pieces that we needed to be able to integrate as part of this initiative to ensure that farmers are part of the discussion, but not just farmers, specifically the community themselves. We can always programatize as much as we want these spaces within the building, but the community at the end of the day will be sort of dictating what their needs are, what they want to be able to grow within their specific building. So I think it's a wonderful question, and I think if anything, this form of collaboration and conversation with farmers, which we have done, is certainly something that needs to be continued to ensure that we are not overtaking their work or diverging their work away, rather that they are truly at the table of these discussions, and potentially could be able to inform what that is, and ideally to be able to participate. And I think this is really an important discussion. So maybe I'll pass it to Brett if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I mean, I just really wanted to add that like our initiatives were never thought about or designed to ever replace our traditional food system, right? We're not looking to eliminate all land-based farming and all farmland and put it in buildings. Like that's just not going to happen. It's not feasible. There's so many types of plants that are grown in a very efficient way, you know, with great people, great techniques, and land sustainable based techniques. We're just looking to add to that, right? We're putting in in the buildings, in infrastructure to support more local. Where Laura was saying, you know, more kind of niche products that may not lend themselves well to Canadian environments. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, thank you, Brett. I think James's question, in my opinion, is pretty compassionate. We know that we did a quick study on you know, let's say like a 2,000 square foot space times the number of mid-mod buildings we have. That area actually kind of amounted to you know, just a few hundred acres, which is only the size of one medium-sized prosperous farm. So this is not necessarily not replacing the farming. Again, as Brett mentioned in his earlier slide, the integration of partnerships with farmers as well, and also the in terms of technology today, the types of crops we can grow isn't as it wouldn't be as diverse as what farmers would provide as well. So I think that farmers are integral and critical. Excellent question, James. Thank you.
Yeah, really good one. There was another, sorry, they're just scrolling down there. There's another question that came in. Have you done some estimates? What would be the cost of an average one-bedroom apartment in a condo where all these features are incorporated? Really great question. We had done a number of costing assessments just as it relates to not so much as it relates to what a one-bedroom apartment would cost, but really more so in comparing things like what would your average amenity space be versus what would your sort of fit out be if it was an aquaponic space or a hydroponic space. And what we found, generally speaking, I mean, I don't want to necessarily provide specifics because it is fluctuating, but generally what we found was that if you were to compare like a 4,000 square foot amenity versus a 4,000 square foot hydroponic space, they're actually comparable. Now, how does that sort of ripple effect into, say, for example, if you were to use the condo fee structure, which I think Brett looked at a little earlier? I think that would be something that needs to be taken into account. But I think it depends on the operational model you're using. That's really important to understand, because a condo fee, you'd be right, it would be baked into the overall cost. But if it's another methodology or operational model that you're going with, the cost of that suite might not necessarily be taken into or added as a result, because maybe that cost is being taken on in different ways. So it depends on the operational model, but I can say just generally from our investigations, just in comparing that amenity to a hydroponic system, it is actually quite comparable. I don't know, gentlemen, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Oh, well said. Thank you. Great question, Constantine. Thank you.
There is another one that came in, again from Talad. Hello. How can designers overcome the municipal challenges here locally that you've outlined to bring these visions to life in the built form, particularly in ways that make them accessible for the broader collective community, regardless of income levels? So I'll maybe pass it off to you, gentlemen. Brett, maybe if you had any thoughts on that.
I mean, well, there are different models, right, in which you can achieve this. Obviously the first step is to talk to your municipality. We have been in conversations with other municipalities, and those that are on board and looking to already implement urban agriculture, in their municipalities. That's an easier sell. Maybe there's obviously some discussions, possibly about maybe a zoning, or there's always some trade-offs that need to happen. But generally speaking, let's say you can do a model where you actually allow community members from outside, into a building. They can access the land. Maybe there's some marginal monies exchanged for that. But we really want to be able to bring the community and have access to this. Yes, condos are expensive, but there are rental apartment unit models too, right? So as long as there's space, and there's the good thing about growing some of the urban agricultural systems is you can utilize spaces in the building that are often left empty, right? Or inefficient. So locker spaces, storage rooms, like these are all spaces where you can program hydroponics, right? With artificial lighting. So I think there's lots of opportunities out there in different municipalities where spaces can be retrofitted.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. I think to add to that, I mean, how designers can overcome municipal challenges. Sometimes there aren't really municipal challenges. So as we said, some regional plans, some city plans, some green development standards do have urban agriculture already in the plan, ready to be sort of not necessarily maybe incentivized, not necessarily financially, but in other ways. Can these or some of these might already be sort of, maybe hopefully this is the right term, innovation credits already built into their plan. So the best is to, like as Laura mentioned, or Laura and Brett mentioned, the best is to sort of do that research. Which municipality is encouraging, urban agriculture, and add elements of that into the project to get approved, and it's following their guidelines. So they'd be happy to.
I think if there's anything that I might be able to add to this is, and it kind of ties into your response, Darius, but also with regards to the earlier question from James, is that municipalities are actually aware of the urban agriculture challenges involved, but also they're also aware of the sort of trends that they're seeing with regards to their farmers, and that next generation of farmers are not necessarily there as much as it used to be. So they're actually actively finding ways to incentivize it. They're actually finding ways to be able to encourage another generation of farmers, whether your family's farmers for many generations, or you're a new farmer that you're not quite sure about whether or not this is for you. But I think municipalities and townships across Ontario are actually talking about this, not just from a municipal level, but also from a regional level. So again, some of our research and investigation took us up to different regions across Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area. And they're actually really trying to find ways to help overcome what those challenges would be, looking towards innovation, looking towards incentivization to a certain extent, not necessarily financially, but just through other means. So I think, if anything, the challenges that we're seeing with regards to implementing such a policy, or rather not a policy, but such an initiative as this, is not necessarily going to be as difficult as we think, as it relates to having it be, say, approved in principle by city staff or by your local counselor, for example. So people know that their residents in their constituents within their certain jurisdiction are actually wanting these things. We've had a number of conversations about this with levels of government. So and again, in our research. So I think there's an interest to be able to make the path easier. And that, if anything, is really exciting and encouraging to see. So it might not be as bad as we think.
I have a question for you all. What was your most exciting discovery or favorite part of doing this initiative?
For me, it was, I enjoy doing the research. I enjoy seeing how the data can actually back such an exciting initiative. So for me, being able to work with Darius and Brett in formulating these ideas, but then really seeing how the research can actually back it, I think was really, for me personally, the most exciting part, because it can be something real, which was very, very exciting.
Yeah, Brett.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, just being able to talk to the municipalities and farmers and biologists and really understanding that there are a lot of individuals that are thinking about this. There are a lot of individuals that are passionate about this, and it's been really fun and encouraging, right, to see that everyone is interested in finding ways of solving, food insecurity in communities.
Yeah, that's great. I think, first of all, seeing the questions here, and not just from architects, but even from Ashley, I think the enthusiasm is really encouraging, and we really thank you for the participation. We got some great questions. I have to say, we've got a great team here at Kirkor. I love working with them. Laura and Brett, we're on the same page. So teamwork feels great. It really does. I know that sounds corny. Sorry, not to be too corny, but we got a great team. We got a great team, and also, as you know, some of you may know who Kirkor, and we know that a majority of our work is developer work. And I have to say, another thing that I really found great was that we're kind of able to let loose. We're kind of able to sketch, and when we start sketching, ideas start coming forward, and the sketches grow, and the concepts become more interesting. And hey, can we do this? And hey, can we do that? So our work actually has a lot of design in it, and it's also very technical. I think it's a beautiful marriage or a harmony between the two. But this research initiative that we've taken, it just kind of gives us that extra opportunity to kind of paint those beautiful pictures that we want to. But and like I said earlier, with the resources that we have, with the people that are out there, and with the enthusiasm that we're seeing in the public and private sectors, that we can actually realize these dreams. And that it's not just a dream for us to be sort of happy about, say, hey, we put a tree in a building. All right, we did well. No, we're helping people. And I think that's the final goal here. And it's really satisfying. And it's a holistic approach, a lot of moving parts, but in the end, we know that there's going to be a lot of people helped, and we're very grateful for that.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, I think one last question before we wrap up. What types of food can be grown vertically?
Good one. Excellent.
Surprisingly,
You guys want to take that?
surprisingly more than you think. You can grow tomatoes, you can grow peppers, you can grow strawberries, a lot of leafy lettuce, herbs and spices. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, some of the distributors that we've spoken to, they're testing things all the time. I think the last one we spoke to, they were testing, I think it was eggplants. But sometimes obviously there's some weight restrictions with some of the fruits and the vegetables that come off the vines, but yeah, surprisingly way more than you think.
James, you got a great comment. Like I said, we can dream all we want, and Laura and Brett and I were in agreement. We are looking at those parts, those moving parts. Okay, the goal, our goal together. Our goal is bigger than bottom lines and this and that. And again, sounds like more romantic language, perhaps, but that's what R&D is about. That's what the initiative is about. We are getting there. We're talking to people so that the developer and client hurdle can be addressed appropriately and effectively. So we're hanging in there and we're continuing, and we appreciate that encouragement.
And I'll say, maybe just to cap it off, Ashley, and we'll pass it off to you, is James, honestly, you're right, developers and clients do have to pay for these projects, but what's so exciting about this particular initiative is that developer and clients are very excited about it and want to get it done. So you need to have a visionary client, a visionary developer to be able to implement this, certainly, and they're very hard to find. But when you do find them and they're eager to implement it and they're excited to learn more and they want to be able to get it done, that is a very encouraging piece. Certainly our part to be able to ensure that the dream becomes a reality is that we need to do our part in ensuring that if there are ways that we can minimize the cost through construction, in working with our peers through an integrated design process, that is something certainly we will do. But you need to have that client be interested to begin with. And we can confidently say that there are. So it is possible.
Laura and Brett, I'm sure you agree, good things take time.
Agreed. And I just saw James come in. As a final note, we just need more clients and developers like this. 100%. 100%. They're out there. We got to find them, but they do exist. We just need more of them.
We're getting there, yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Laura, Darius, and Brett. Thank you so much for today's presentation. I have learned a lot of valuable information. I hope everyone else here who's been attending. Thank you so much for your attention. As we conclude this webinar, I just want to draw your attention to a few announcements. So the OAA will report your participation from today's webinar on your transcript. Therefore, there's no need for individual reporting. We kindly ask for your patience as we process and confirm everyone who's attended to get accreditation for their hours today, and that will happen within a few weeks. Also, all attendees will receive a link to submit your feedback in a survey. So please take the time to fill it out. We appreciate your feedback, and it helps us to plan for future webinars. It also helps our speakers. So you'll get that within a couple hours. Once again, thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you again, Darius, Brett, and Laura, and have a pleasant remainder of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Ashley. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.